Yes, ladies and gentlemen, dear online participants, welcome back after a short coffee break. And also the live stream was a little bit in a coffee break. So sorry for the 2 minutes delay. We are now here in the beautiful area of Lübeck in the conference hotel. Slow down to a, for me, much more interesting topic than maybe all the others. It's digital ready legislation. Digital ready legislation ensures an easier workload for public employees and a more effective digital service for citizens and corporations. Denmark is a front runner in digital ready legislation, not only because it's mandatory to assess whether the legislation is digital ready. I'm very much pleased that Rikke ZEBERG is the General Director for the Danish Agency for Digitisation in the Ministry of Finance since August 2007, and she will be with us today. The agency was especially established in 2011 to speed up the digitization processes required to modernize the Danish welfare society. The agency is in charge of the digitization of Denmark and is responsible for the implementation of the government's digital ambitions in public sector. Rikke, the floor is yours, and welcome to northern part of Germany. Welcome to Lübeck.
Thank you very much. Right now I'm sitting in Copenhagen, but I grew up near the German border, very near to Lübeck, so I know the area, and very pleased. I'm sad that I have to be here in Copenhagen and not be able to be in Lübeck, but on the other hand, then it's possible for me to join you today. But thank you very much for having me. As you said, my name is Rikke ZEBERG. I'm the Director General for the Agency for Digitisation under the Ministry of Finance in Denmark. In the next 15 minutes, it's my ambition to give you on three main parts. First, I'll talk about why it's even necessary to consider digital concerns when we legislate. Second, I'll describe our approach to ensuring that legislation is digital ready. I've also brought you a couple of examples of digital ready legislation. And then finally, I'll discuss what we've been seeing of the lessons learned and present some of our current initiatives regarding digital ready legislation. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. The first question is why legislation needs to be digital ready. The best way to answer this question is by taking a look upon what happens when legislation is not digital ready. Digital ready legislation was a response to cases in which complex and imprecise rules made it very difficult to implement and administer digital regulation after it went through Parliament. This was to a large extent the case due to the reasons stated on this slide. Early on, implementation of digital solution was generally not given much attention at the stage of drafting new legislation. This included considerations such as consistent use of terms, risk profiles, impacts of the users, administrative costs and procedures, and so on. Next slide, please. So back in 2018, a political agreement was reached in Parliament. The agreement requires all legislation proposed from July 2018 onwards to be digital ready. The focus was on creating clear and simple legislation that is easy to implement and easy to administrate digitally. The aim of the agreement is to foster, first, better public service through a higher level of transparency and a better access to service for all citizens and companies. Simpler processes and therefore a more effective public sector which eliminates unnecessary bureaucracy. And then a minimum of unexpected pitfalls in digital implementation, as new legislation can result in cost overruns, delays, and incomplete digital solutions if the potential pitfalls are not addressed from the start. It was also decided to establish a secretariat with the main task of making sure that the ambitions of the political agreement was implemented. The Secretariat collaborates with ministries on an ongoing basis regarding guidance and support on how to secure that new legislation is digital ready. The main part of this task is screening and delivering feedback on draft legislation. Next slide, please. This is the 7 principles of digital ready legislation and impact assessment. For legislation to be digital ready, it has to fulfill 2 criteria. First, the rules must have been drafted with 7 key principles in mind. The principles ensure that legislation will support the use of digital solutions, and they concern a broad variety of parameters needed to create a digital ready legislation. Let me get into a bit more detail with principle number 4 and 5 to mention just a couple. The 2 principles also illustrates the digital ready legislation on the one hand is about utilizing digital solutions and on the other hand securing safe and secure data handling citizens' right. For principle 4, it's about recycling and reuse. This principle reminds us that a precondition for the reuse of data is consistent definitions across sectors. It is important to make sure that the same entities are being used across registers belonging to different authorities and ministries. This opens up the possibility of sharing data across sectors, which means that citizens don't have to report the same data several times. The principle 5 highlights the need to ensure that government bodies handle citizens' data with the proper concern for security. This entails both clarifying principles of data protection in the drafting phase, as well as introducing the suitable technical measures to ensure that data remains secure throughout its lifetime. In addition to these 7 principles, it's mandatory to carry out an assessment of what implementation consequences the legislation expected to have. This means asking questions like, what will be the administrative impact when the new rules are introduced? Will there be a need for implement new digital solutions or to tweak and adjust existing solutions? What are the costs and what are the time limit for it? And has the impact of the legislation on citizens been sufficiently documented? Next slide, please. Here I have an example of legislation that is made digital ready. In Denmark, good air quality in cities is, as in the case elsewhere, been a priority for some time. One of the initiatives to meet this priority is mandatory use of particle filters on diesel-driven traffic in so-called environmental city zones. However, the question is, how do the authorities carry out control with what vehicles can enter the zones and which cannot? And how can control be carried out in an economic and smart way? One way it would be in a manual way with personnel, like, for example, the police keeping track of vehicles entering the environmental zones. Besides the fact that it would be difficult to control a consistently moving crowd of vehicles manually, it would also demand a significant amount of personnel. Instead, the solution is an automatic control system which scans the license number of every vehicle entering the zones. The scanning technology then connects to central vehicle registers as a way to check if the vehicles meets the required environmental standards. In this way, legislation may benefit of the possibility to use objective criteria such as license numbers to support automated decision making, which is one of the principles of digital ready legislation. Furthermore, the legislation prioritizes the use of existing governmental data registers to check if each vehicle lives up to the requirements. Another example, we see on the next slide, please, is an example of how data sharing between the private and the public sector can lead to increased value for users. As many of you will be aware, the field of mobility services is undergoing rapid technological change. These days, it's not an unusual sight for people to travel using a shared electric scooter, bicycle, or indeed even another person's car. The challenge, however, is that it is becoming a challenge of researching all the different modes of transportation accessible in a given area. New legislation in Denmark attempts to tackle this problem by allowing mobility providers to supply data about the availability of their services to existing public sector travel planners, comparable to the likes of BEYER.de. This should potentially mean that when a user visits the travel planner, she's suddenly reminded that riding sharing or electric scooters is an option nearby. The legislation is an example of how data sharing between the private and the public sector can lead to a better experience for users of mobility solutions. Next slide, please. I have presented examples of how we work to make legislation more fit for the digital age. The work is not finished yet, but we have already few lessons that I would like to share. First, a lot of improvement can actually be gained by small changes in the legislation. I hope also that was made clear from the examples I brought. Secondly, it takes time to build up awareness and compliance about digital-ready legislation. Our process with digital-ready legislation can be divided into 3 phases. First, creating recognition of digital-ready legislation among stakeholders. Then secondly, building a trusting relationship with ministries, and finally, optimization of the day-to-day dialogue with ministries and law workers. Sorry. Then it takes both time and knowledge to do a thorough assessment of digital impacts of new legislation. We've seen a lot of improvement over the last couple of years, but there's still room for further improvement. The impact assessment should secure thorough and well-informed policy proposals for the political level to discuss. Law drafters experience challenges when incorporating EU legislation in national law in a digital-ready manner. As EU legislation acts beside a significant part of national legislation, it is considered as a challenge. Therefore, the possibilities for making new legislation more digitally fit sometimes depends on whether digitization have been properly considered into the legislative act from the European side at the beginning. Next slide, please. So, as a response to these challenges, we have started some initiatives. First, we prioritize reaching out to policy officers to support the digital-ready legislation in a priority throughout the early stages of legislative preparation. We are continuously supporting law drafters in incorporating digital-ready legislation. In order to do so, we offer online guidance for law drafters through digital checklists, case examples, and of course, new hires in ministries. A systematic and targeted revision of legacy legislation would enable us to reap the benefits of digital solutions on a wider scale. It is among our tasks and part of our mandate. We are currently exploring the possibilities for developing a technology able to scan legislation for phases relevant for digital-ready legislation. That's not easy, but it's the way ahead. And then finally, we prioritize dialogue with the EU and other member states in order to play a part in making European legislation even more digital fit. We believe it's important to share we believe it's important to share know-how and important experience between the member states, create unity in digital practices across borders, and finally also, as we will do today, discuss a common direction in EU for digital-ready legislation. This concludes my presentation. I see the last slide, please, on the state of digital-ready legislation in Denmark. I hope you found it to be useful and of inspiration to further discussion. It's also a bit hard to have this discussion because you need to understand the legislative process in the different member states to understand what we're actually doing. But you can read more about the subject and find more detailed guidance and case studies on our website at this address here. It's not good in these times to have a cough, but I'm good. But you are very welcome to contact also our secretariat with specific questions, comments, or inquiries. Thank you. And now I will just have my cough.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rikke. Mange tak. And I like this, let's say that you're still reading so many printed books. What do you think about digital ready legislation? What do you identify as the biggest barrier, and how to beat those challenges?
Yeah, I'm sitting in my home office, and I love reading books, and I think it's important to still read the physical books when we are here. But what I see at the biggest barriers, I think digital ready legislation requires a cultural change, both in the ministry and in the political process of making the legislation. And we've been making the legislation for the same way for very many years in the different countries, and it's also difficult to change this culture. The lawmaking people, the lawyers, they have just recently started to learn about this topic in their studies. So it's a challenge to get everybody in the ministries to think about the digital consequences of the legislation. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And the answer to that is we have to discuss it. We have to hire the competencies among the people who actually make the legislation. And then we also have a dialogue with the universities who are actually starting to teach in digital ready legislation in Denmark now.
How did you manage these competences? How did you manage these digital competences for lawyers in ministries, for example, in Denmark?
There we have made many courses, and we have made guidelines, and we have a very tight dialogue with the ministry. So the secretariat has held, I think, maybe 100 courses where they teach in what is digital ready legislation and how can you use it. And every time there's a new proposal putting forward to Parliament, they are obliged in the ministries to go through the 7 principles and the implementation questions, and then they send before the legislation is put forward in Parliament, and before there's a public hearing, they are obliged to contact the secretariat, and the secretariat has a dialogue with the people who actually write the draft for the legislation, and then they have discussions on how have you looked at the principles, have you described it properly. We put forward some question we think they could answer to get it more detailed, and that's the way to change the cultural in the ministries, I think.
Was this maybe also the success factor behind that you have definitely some criticism and concerning digital legislation, and with this help you overcome this criticism?
Yeah, but I think that there was also a political wanted for this we had actually a political agreement upon the digital legislation, because we had some legislation which went through Parliament, and afterwards when the legislation should be implemented in the ministries, then it showed that the system, it was very hard to change the system. Sometimes it took a very long time. Sometimes it wasn't even possible, and it cost a lot of money. And it was necessary that we were getting better at asking the questions already before we started actually having the political agreements and writing the legislation, because maybe the politicians would have chosen something else if they knew what the implementation cost or the effect of the legislation actually was. And also we discovered that sometimes when legislation when it had come through parliament, then we had some in Denmark. A lot of our digital system is actually made by the private market, and some of the ministries couldn't even see what actually the effect of the legislation was before it was handed over to the private company who actually had the IT system which administered the legislation. And then suddenly there were some of the decisions that were supposed to be made in parliament actually would put on a private company to how they interpret how they managed the legislation and saw the details on how it could be implemented. And of course, it's not private companies or who should implement or decide on what the small nuances in the legislation should be like. It should be decided in parliament. So this need for having clarification of the effect of the legislation was needed to be done up front, and it was this need who led to the political agreement also. And it's very important when we talk about digital ready legislation to state that the main principle here is that it should be simple. Legislation should be simple and transparent. That's actually the main principle.
So transparency and lobbying can go hand in hand.
Yes.
Before we come to a discussion, also Germany is on its way to establish digital ready legislation, and it's a pleasure to have also Ulrike NAGORNI today with us. She's a lawyer specialized in drafting, implementation and evaluation of legislation. She's in the Director General Digital Administration and Management and the Online Access Act in the Federal Ministry of Interior, Building and Community in Germany, and she's responsible for a project to develop a tool for checking whether legislative processes can be put into a digital form. The German approach to establish digital ready legislation. In this role, she applies her knowledge of the legal basis for and effects of digital transformation on public administration and her thorough understanding of methodology in combination with the applicable rules of constitutional and administrative law, a very important part in Germany. Ms. NAGORNI also actively shares her knowledge in the field of lawmaking by providing advanced training for public officials at the Federal Academy of Public Administration. And we are looking forward, Ms. NAGORNI, to your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased that I have the opportunity today to give you insight into our approach to the digital ready legislation, and I look very much forward to share your knowledge, to know a little bit more about the Denmark approach and perhaps to other approaches in new member states as well. Could we please change the slide? Thank you. Germany is currently developing a tool at federal level to test whether legislative proposals are digital ready. The Federal Ministry of the Interior is seeking to make legislative proposals more digitally compatible, both in legal and methodological terms. This is mandated by the federal ministers in the federal cabinet responsible for digital transformation matters. Past experience has shown that the same or similar legal and technical questions come up when drawing legislative proposals which aim at the digital transformation of government. In view of the wide range of digital transformation projects to be carried out under significant time pressure, we are seeking to find answers to those questions which are generally valid in legal terms and meet requirements for enforcement. We will also prepare these answers methodologically to benefit further legislative processes. In terms of methodology, we will have the future application of the test tool in mind. Alongside legal issues, we will apply the lab method to identify a toolkit of methods. Next slide, please. One point is very important with regard to the German approach. When designing a digital readiness test tool, the federal aspects must be kept in mind. Under the articles of our basic law, federal acts are enforced by the federal states, usually in their own right. The 16 federal states enforce federal law. Now we have to stay one moment, thanks. Using their own structures and accommodating regional differences where appropriate. Now we can change, please. Thanks. When discussing the relevant legal elements and the concept of methods for testing whether legislative proposals are digital ready, we will look at a wide range of influences. These will include, above all, the following: administrative law. Existing provisions in administrative law and possible future legal amendments needed to make fully digital administrative procedures possible. Data protection. These provisions too impact the way that digital administrative projects are implemented. Technical requirements and state-of-the-art technology. There already are good technical solutions to a lot of issues. However, we expect unresolved issues to emerge at the interface of law and technology. What is technically possible? What legal requirements must be met beforehand? How do legal requirements impact technical implementation? What are the legal limits to what technology we can offer? Harmonized public infrastructure is important as well, of course. We will deal with several topics. Which areas of public infrastructure have already been harmonized? Which areas of public infrastructure are being harmonized to support the implementation of specific projects? The legislation enforced by the federal states, as I said before, is usually is a very important point in Germany. This means that the drafters of legislative proposals must work in close coordination with them. To this end, we will try out the use of agile methods. And finally, the needs, not finally is relative, of course not the most irrelevant, but one of the most relevant aspects of our approach, the needs of citizens and businesses. Finally, we will focus on our citizens and businesses as the users of government services. Our aim is to draw up legislative proposals in a way which makes the implementation process and the administrative procedures behind them as easy and efficient as possible for citizens, businesses, as well as the government, paving the way into the digital future. Next slide, please. With this move towards digital-ready legislation, we will be laying the legal groundwork for drafting legislation. We will compile and prepare recurring legal issues and existing solutions. We will identify any unresolved legal issues. We will work out viable solutions. We will pool our results, prepare them, and make them generally available for use in specific administrative procedures. In this way, we will set the framework for uniform tests of legislative proposals as to their digital readiness. Next slide, please. From the methodological point of view, we are seeking to help drafters of legislative proposals check whether the proposals are digitally compatible. As we are only beginning to develop a test process, we have not decided yet which methods we will recommend for specific procedures. However, we can imagine having various elements in a toolkit. For instance, a digital review guide, a database of typical legal issues, key questions modeled on the ones used in Denmark, or even a team of experts which provides agile support in specific projects. Next slide, please. In Germany, the digital readiness of proposed legislation will be tested at the beginning of the drafting process. Legal and enforcement issues need to be taken into account. There are several elements of the drafting process which help to draft a well-balanced piece of legislation. The digital readiness test will highlight legal issues which concern the digital transformation of the administrative procedures and the relevant aspects of the enforcement. Projects will undergo scrutiny in the digital labs to make sure that they are digitally compatible. This takes place in parallel to the intra- and interministerial coordination process and involves the federal states, significantly aiding the entire drafting process. And the legislative proposal is then discussed in Parliament, enacted, and enforced by the federal states. The final important question, of course, is when we are going to start. A kickoff event will be held next week, so we are just at the moment just in time to start with the process, and we intend to submit legal and methodological results by mid-2021. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. NAGORNI. What would be the most important questions you have to Ms. ZEBERG?
I would be very interested in listening or getting some more information on how you combine the legal drafting process with the digital readiness tests.
Halt, stopp. Yeah. Rikke, you are still commuted.
I got muted. Okay. Now I'm. Yeah, sorry. What I was saying was that law drafters in Denmark already now are advised to follow a guide which is made by the Ministry of Justice, which aims to secure a high degree of quality in the new legislation. In this guide, digital ready legislation is now pointed out as one of the essential points of attention when drafting new legislation. And the existing processes included already assessment of financial consequences, administrative consequences for citizens, and the impact on climate, environment, etc. And in this guides, we now have implemented the principles from digital ready legislation as well. And then we had also this new requirement that before the draft legislation is sent out in the public hearing, they are obliged to send the draft legislation to the secretariat. So we have a dialogue with them before the hearing process. So before it goes to Parliament, we have the hearing process, but we also have this this guide they have to follow when drafting up, and we already are in a dialogue with the ministries there. Does that answer to your question?
Thank you. Yeah.
Rikke, do you have such toolkits like a digital review guide or a database for typical legal issues?
We don't have a database, but we have on our homepage or from the agency, there is tools. That's a guide, which is the ordinary guide from Ministry of Justice, and then we made specific toolkit for the lawmakers who want to study more or get more information about the specific guidelines. And as part of the political decision, which was made back in 2018, it was decided that in 2021 we should make an evaluation of the concept. So right now we are drafting an evaluation, and on top of that we should have a political discussion of what is working, where do we need to do more, and how has it gone. And then also all the we're making when we have the secretariat is getting the legislation, we are always making a letter to the ministries where we are writing to them what we think they have done well and what questions they could consider, and then we are mailing this letter to them, and all these letters can also be found on our webpage, so that there's transparency in the work and the progress that we are making, so everybody can go and see what we have recommended.
Ms. Nagorni, I think that digital ready legislation is not a question on technology. It's a question on legal and organizational matters and, of course, also on political power. Legislation, you mentioned in Germany, is enforced by 16 federal states to put them in their own legislation. So, for example, such a toolkit in Germany, would this toolkit be also available for municipalities, for example?
Yeah, very interesting question. From the German point of view, we have to see two sides. We do have the legislation, which is done by the federal level, and we do have the implementation. And the implementation lays normally with the Länder level, where obviously the third level of federal government is included as well. In the drafting process, we have to look at the federal level as well as to the state level, the 16 Länder, which include the communal level as well. And we have to have an exchange. On the other hand, the legal process itself, the piece of law which is drafted, that is originally federal level. So we have to divide here. We are going to start with a federal level legislation, giving advice to that, including the implementation of law at the moment.
Rikke, do you also have such a complicated, let's say, federalism? Or what would be your advice to get a similar concept of digital legislation properly off ground in other EU countries?
I think in Denmark it's a bit easier because we're a smaller country and we have a very strong federal level. And a lot of our legislation is going through parliament in Denmark, but the implementation is in the municipalities. And I think that the system in Germany is a bit more complicated than in Denmark, but we also have the problem here in Denmark that the legislation is go through state level, through parliament, and then the implementation is in the municipalities. And that was actually one of the problems, that some of the ministries who is drafting up legislation didn't have the proper discussions with the municipalities before the legislation was put through parliament about what is the effects, what kind of IT systems is actually supporting the workers in the municipalities who should administer this legislation afterwards. So digital ready legislation is a lot about asking the right questions and thinking about the administrative procedures already when you're starting drafting your legislation. So you can have so it's get easier and effective to administer. And then there's also the whole question about how does this affect the citizens' rights, the citizens' data. There's a lot of discussion in Denmark and now about privacy of data, and I think you also have that in Germany and the rest of Europe. And all these questions is very important that we ask them before the politicians should make their decisions in parliament. And we should not, as a civil servant, I should not decide whether to go left or right, but I need to present for parliament or for the politicians a transparent decision, a transparent draft of legislation, so they could make the decisions and knowing what kind of effects the legislation will have out in the municipalities and when it reaches the citizens. So it's much about also having the transparency for the politicians, so they don't get these surprises afterwards where we as civil servants come back and say, oh, this legislation, maybe you wanted it this way, but if you wanted this, it is very costly and takes maybe 1 year to have a new IT system or change the existing system. In Denmark, we are a very digitized country, but we also have a lot of legacy systems, legacy IT systems, and these systems can be very difficult to just transform to do new things. So we need to make sure that it's even possible to do the things that the politicians actually want with the new legislation.
Rikke, we are here to learn, let's say, and maybe it's a secure question, or how did you manage that politicians understand what is digital ready legislation and what is their role in this process? Did they have to pass an exam?
No, but there's been this political agreement. So there was a big discussion between the different parties in Denmark about that this was necessary, and a, it was necessary to now to start work with the digital legislation, and they had this political agreement. And I will say that for making a cultural change, it is very important that the politicians are agreed. It was every party in parliament who agreed on this political agreement. So it was a unified parliament who decided that this was important. And that was very important for us afterwards for making it live and work out in the ministries, that we had this strong political commitment. And now it's getting very excited. I'm very excited about how the politicians will take to look at it when we have this evaluation after 3 years. Are they satisfied with the effects, and do they think that we should continue it like we do now? Do they think we should have a stronger secretariat? We are only 7-8 people there now, or they think that it's sufficient the way we have brought it forward for the past 3 years. But I also mention now that we are in an EU context, that we see that there's a lot of the legislation coming from the EU now who has a big impact on our systems, and it can be very difficult for us to change the systems when we have now there's this SDG legislation coming from the Commission, that we should have a mutual recognition from all the digital services between member states. And it's a very good idea, but we can see that the pace with which we should be ready for doing this, it's very hard for us, because we have a lot of digital solutions in Denmark. We should make ready for this mutual recognition. And I think that it would be very important that we also start thinking about the EU legislation and thinking about how should it be implemented in the different member states, and what is the cost, because the cost is different from the member states when you're very digitized and you have to change a lot in your systems, existing systems, or if you don't is that much digitized yet, but you can build in the new requirements in the system already. So it's very important to have these discussions before you make up you finalize your EU legislation as well.
Rikke, that was also a question coming up on the audience from the internet. How many people are working in the Agency for Digitization for legal digital ready legislation?
We only 7 to 8 people, and we have to look through 250 proposals a year. That means they're very busy, and also that they're not as thorough as we already could want us to be. And sometimes we have very short amount of time to have the discussions with the ministries. And that's why we ask more questions to them than we give them actual advice on how they should do. We ask the questions to the ministries who make the legislation, so we can start, making them think of what is the question they should ask and what should they consider when they are putting the legislation forward. And sometimes they don't have time for a very thorough assessment. But I believe that it's a cultural change, and that we just need to keep on asking the questions, and then getting all the ministries to get more knowledge about how to make good, high quality legislation.
Ms. Nagorni, would be these also the next steps for Germany to have this discussion in Parliament on digital ready legislation, to have such an agreement?
I think we are some steps behind. As we start a process now, we intend, first of all, to have a thorough look on the existing legal framework to check which pieces of law we do have, generally speaking, which help to establish digital ready legislation and digitally properly assessed processes. Only after having done this, I think this discussion should be started in Germany on a political level, because we have to go to the grassroots level first and to check what situation we find at the moment with regard to our legal framework. That's what we would like to do during the next month until maybe summer of 21.
Rikke also told us what is their wish to the European level. What is your wish, Ms. Nagorni, to the European level?
I think it would be very interesting to establish some exchange between the member states, how to deal with all the aspects of digital ready legislation. I'm convinced that the legal processes and the legislation system within each member state will be crucial to that and very important to have in mind in discussing. And I could well imagine that one of the next steps would be to discuss how could we influence the legislation at EU level with regard to digital ready legislation as a next step.
Thank you very much. I think the Danish example of making legislation digital ready illustrates that rules can be modernized to streamline administrative workflows and provide cohesive services to benefit citizens and businesses. I think Europe is on the right track, and we started today, and I hope the European Commission will also start to have such a working group to get more into the discussion of digital ready legislation for all European countries, also for the new member state countries. I think we have to work together on this process. Thanks very much to Ms. Nagorni, and mange tak to Rikke ZEBERG for joining us here on stage. And next time, hopefully, you're personally live on stage here. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we will make a 5 minutes short break, and then we come back here to the very important next step to the single digital gateway regulation of the European Commission and the data once only principle. Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear online participants, welcome back to one of the most important topics for Europe in the next couple of months. It's the single digital gateway, which will revolutionize digital governance in Europe and introduce the once-only principle across borders. This was also one of the 7 principles of the 2017 Tallinn e-governance declaration. It will bring more convenience, security and trust to citizens and businesses. No data is already available to the state in digital form. EVA has to be taught again. But that's not all. With the SDG, the European single digital market will finally become reality. People will be able to re-register across borders online, register branches of companies abroad, hire employees anywhere in Europe, and much more, and hopefully all this with a few clicks. Yeah, how this works, how it was developed, and what it needs for the next steps will be explained by a long-time Austrian colleague, Professor Dr. Robert KRIMMER. He's the head of the Digital Governance Lab Estonia, and he holds the European Research Area Chair full professorship of governance, e-governance within Skype Institute of the University of Tartu in Estonia. And he continues to hold also an assignment as adjunct professor of e-governance in the Ragnar Nurkse department at Tallinn University of Technology. Robert's research is focused on digital transformation, cross-border e-services, electronic participation and democracy, as well as e-voting, and all issues further developing a digital society. Robert is also an associate editor of the international scientific journal, Government Information Quarterly, where he's in charge of participation issues. In 2019, he has been mentioned as one of the top 16 academics within the list of 100 most influential people in digital government by Political. So we are quite honored that he will be here. He has coordinating TOP, one of the EU high-level, let's say, large-scale pilots for the single digital gateway. And there are not many who have this expertise, except maybe Ekaterina FEDKO, which I also welcome here on the, let's say, the virtual stage with the screen, because she has written her master thesis on implementation of the once-only principle in the cross-border context, and she has analyses of good practices in this field. Now she's a Blue Book trainee in the DG Digit of the European Commission. So Robert, Ekaterina, the floors are yours. We can start with your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So I guess you will be sharing the slide?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. So the idea of our presentation that we put together today is kind of on one hand side to give you an inside perspective from our large-scale pilot that actually had the aim of building this technical infrastructure for allowing cross-border e-governance actually to happen. And then on the other hand, to provide an external view through Katerina's work on actually comparing country implementations and different approaches towards once only. So I will do the first part where I'm actually giving you what is the once only principle and how we have actually started to implement it and how we actually develop this technological solution for Europe. And then you will get kind of like the member state perspective on this and how the reality looks. Next slide, please. So when we start off with this idea of actually making a digital Europe happen, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, is fully with us, that she actually believes that digital Europe is where Europe can actually contribute to this digital transformation worldwide, and that actually data is going to be the fuel of this digital transformation. And we need to make it easy for both citizens and enterprises to use this data in the best possible way and not to have to waste time on data that has already been collected and provided to the public administration. Next slide, please. So that is the idea of when we look back at the first analysis or the first stage models that actually were providing us with an idea of how could digital government develop over time. And Lane and Lee's model from back in 2001 was really one of the first that started out with providing an idea of cataloging services, like through an administrative citizen portals such as help.gv or eesti.de here in Estonia, and then providing transactional services thereafter, like text collection, like documentation of where do you live, and then actually, according to the idea of Lane and Lee, it would immediately happen that first a vertical integration, meaning along the lines of different administrative levels, but within the same topic, within the same area, would actually take place. And after that, a horizontal integration, meaning across different sectors in the public sector. So imagining that you would have data around the vehicles owners, and on the other hand, you would be able to connect that with your fitness to actually drive a car, so that the application process for your driver's license will go much faster, much smoother. But the reality is that most countries on this digital transformation journey, even 20 years later, are somewhere between the transaction and the vertical integration stage. And very few countries have actually managed to go beyond the horizontal integration, actually even have proactive e-government services where they actually use the data to predict what a citizen might need as the next step. Next slide, please. So what do we need in order to get to this vertical and horizontal integration? It is actually providing a data exchange layer and technical infrastructure such like as an enterprise service bus that would allow us to collect and store data only once. That would allow automated data sharing, that would actually allow us to replace redundant data collection with information requests from the original source, meaning you're not copying data, but you're actually linking to the original information place, just as Tim Berners-Lee had actually foreseen when he was designing the World Wide Web back in the early 90s. And that in turn would allow us to have a better data reliability and not having to waste our time, for example, on verifying if the address of our citizens is still accurate and we can mail them a letter with an invoice to the correct address. But rather we can always refer to the address where they are registered in the population registry, and through that really having reliable data and using the money for where we actually need it. Next slide, please. So for realizing this once only principle, you want to make sure that you only collect the necessary information, that you actually exchange the data so that citizens and entrepreneurs are never asked again for the same information. But you also respect the data protection rules when you're reusing data, that you're actually using the data only for the purpose that was originally foreseen. And if not, then you would ask the citizen again, or the entrepreneur, if you're actually entitled to use that data again, or also provide them with the necessary preview functions so that they have an understanding how the data is going to be used and reused in the process. So having those data protection rules in mind is really important. So how do we get now to this, not only this integration within a member state, but actually also beyond that, so that we can actually work cross-border on the European sphere? And here the instrument of the large-scale pilots, which was first coined during the Austrian presidency in 2006, to have a development for jointly operating e-government principles in Europe. So one of the first ones was actually the historic large-scale pilot, and the TOP project was following in this tradition. So we got together more than 23 beneficiaries from 23 countries, both inside and outside the European Union, where actually in the end more than 50 partners, about half from public administration, about 1/3 from universities, the rest coming from companies, would start to jointly imagine how can you actually build such a data exchange layer for Europe that goes beyond the organizational borders, beyond the national borders, and actually allows the public administrations, companies, and universities to work together in realizing this European single digital market and bringing that forward. We actually were quite money efficient. We had only some 8 million euros available, and we started in the January of 2017, and we're finally going to end in January of next year. Please, next slide. So with our project, we actually want to save time for public administrations and businesses. We want to lower the administrative burden and the costs. We want to improve the service quality and public sector efficiency We want to comply, and we are actually compliant with data protection legislation. We want to make sure that our systems are interoperable, provide data quality and user friendliness as well as security in order to have this better functioning digital single market. Next slide, please. So we do that by exploring and demonstrating the once only principle, by enabling this cross-border data exchange, by focusing actually first on businesses and public administrations, because here the data protection issues are a bit smaller. Obviously, through the single digital gateway regulation, which came during the lifetime of our project, we expanded our focus not only on businesses and also towards citizens. So we actually got this data protection issue back in, but that allowed us even to improve our technical solution by enhancing it through this data consent and data preview function. Next slide, please. So through that, we are actually showing that we can contribute to the e-government and public administration development strategies on the one side of the European Union, but also of the member states, by actually proving that there is time savings and cost reductions. And we are actually doing that through having pilots in 3 different domains, where we actually showed that on the one side we can do business mobility solutions, where we can actually work along the lines of business registers and the business register interconnection service that exists on the European level, as well as the maritime domain that kind of proved for us as a validation for the concepts that we have from the business mobility domain and applied also to maritime. And that gave us great insights into how to extend the once only principle on a European scale. And that's how we are actually willing to contribute, or how we believe that we can contribute by savings of about 5 billion euros every year through implementing the once only principle on a European scale. Next slide. So how did we do that? We actually have 11 member states that are actively piloting in the general business mobility stage. We have 7 partners that have completed all the piloting milestones already, and the last 4 will come in these last months of our projects. We are actively collaborating with the Common Europe, with the Connecting Europe facility, with the Business Register Interconnection Service, with the ISA Square unit and the eCertis team, so that we're actually establishing, making sure that we're developing the right tools that Digital Europe needs. We have initiated the handover over to the European Commission, so we have licensed our first outcomes under the European EUPL license and shared it with the member states for validation. And we're continuing our handover and finalize it until the end of the project, including intensifying our e-procurement piloting activities. So let me come to a first summary on the next slide. So we will actually facilitate what the Single Digital Gateway in its Article 14 is foreseeing, that we actually are going to have administrative procedures that will allow citizens and businesses to work cross-border and to actually implement this vision of a digital Europe. The Europe portal will actually ensure the access to that information and the procedures, and TOP will serve as a role model, kind of as a blueprint for that implementation of the Single Digital Gateway regulation. And we are working on ensuring the sustainability of our results through the European Commission and the Once Only Sustainability Organization. And with that internal view, I would like to now hand over or give back to Christian to probably then ask Ekaterina to go next. And then I think we'll be able to answer any questions that you might have after this country perspective.
Thank you very much, Robert. Ekaterina, please.
Thank you, Christian and Robert, for the introduction. My name is Ekaterina, and I'm graduated in electronic government from universities of Leuven, Münster, and Tallinn Technical University. And I was writing my master thesis on implementation of once only principle by EU member states. Can we do the next slide, please? Thank you. I think Robert has already covered the introductory part, so I'll just briefly talk through my motivation of the study, and then we'll proceed with the actual outcomes of my study. There have been a lot of e-government regulations on both European and national level, and yet different countries achieved quite different success in terms of implementation of e-government principles and also OP notion. However, with the ongoing number of cross-border projects such as TUBE, Digital Europe for All, there is a necessity to bring all the countries onto the same page. And thus, there was my research question: how do different EU member states address the implementation of the once-only principle, and how their experience can be adopted on the other countries? Next slide, please. I decided to conduct an in-depth study on several EU member states to basically see to what extent their OOP practices are different. And my basic idea was to pick 4 countries with a more or less comparable background but different OOP outcomes. So to objectify the selection criteria, I introduced some parameters on internet access and economic parameters, and then I came up with 2 potentially interesting sets of the countries, which are Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Croatia, and I can see the other one, I think it was Hungary. And the other set was Belgium, Germany, Austria, and France. And for a number of reasons, I eventually went for the second one. And then I analyzed the 4 chosen countries from the perspective of the framework that was described in one of the Robert's TUBE deliverables. So I basically looked into administrational level, where I considered all the organizational setup, governing principles, and managerial approaches. Then I looked into the legal perspective. Well, it's all about regulatory framework, its compatibility with existing EU regulations. And then I looked into technical part with an overview of functioning solutions and infrastructures. Next slide, please. Coming down the countries themselves, I started with Belgium, and Belgium has Belgium has been scoring quite high in terms of all the government benchmarks. And from administrative perspective, Belgium has a super complicated structure involving federal, regional, and community governments, with sometimes overlapping fields of actions. But interestingly, they're actually quite well harmonized, as for example in case with National Digital Strategy, which was formed at the federal level, and then it was leveled down to the regional level and adopted to their regional peculiarities. And to hold it all together, they introduced an FPS BOSS, which is a sort of backup horizontal ministry to care about all the government initiatives, and DG Digital Transformation was a coordinating body in charge of all the projects. And concerning legal pillar, they have adopted a dedicated OOP legislation in 2014 with a number of associated legal acts in the more or less the same time frame on open data strategy and on implementation of EAD. And regarding the technical layer, altogether, the federal government has implemented Federal Service Bus, which is connected to the ministries and exchanged information with them. And then what they did, they actually copied the Federal Service Bus and posted it on the regional clusters, creating service buses for Flanders, Wallonia, and Brussels, which are in their turn related to the municipalities, who are the actual providers of citizen and business-related data. And then the data goes all the way up back to the Federal Service Bus, which also performs the function of connecting Belgium to the other European countries in context of cross-border service provision. Next slide, please. Then Austria. Austria has been frequently performed as scored as one of the most advanced e-government countries, sometimes even exceeding principles that were agreed in the Tallinn Declaration, and for example evolving from one-stop shop into no-stop shop. And from administrative perspective, Austria is de jure federated country, but de facto it has quite a centralized approach. They appointed Federal Ministry for Digital and Economic Affairs as an overarching coordinating body. And to ensure everyone's representing, they also created platform Digital Austria, which invites all relevant stakeholders for collaboration. Then they also have a set of agencies exploring further development of e-government and one's only principal initiatives. And they are also encouraging all the ministries to develop their own digital projects. Something I found very interesting, like any other country, is their agile approach toward legislation on e-government. It was adopted in 2004, and ever since it's been revised every now and then and continuously modified. And then recently,
Okay. Seems the
Ah,
internet connection
it's
broke.
back again.
okay,
Okay.
I'm not sure where I got lost.
In Austria.
You're lost in Austria, but it's not the
Okay.
bad place.
Yeah, so I'll just briefly repeat. I'm not sure what exactly was missing from the talk. So Austria has really very well coordinated agencies who are in charge of e-government and all the OOP initiatives. Then they something that I find very, very interesting and that is not present in other countries is that they adopted an agile approach toward yeah, I'm still there. Sorry. An agile approach towards e-government legislation making. It was adopted in 2004, and ever since they actually didn't adopt a new legislation, they were just continuously revising it, and also later included the notion on one's only principle, and thus it maintains very consistent and relevant. And also their technical solution is is also very well integrated, and all the data, all the base registers are stored and managed centrally, and they can be accessed by using a national number. And also they introduced several technical features to ensure privacy of the data, which was also subject of a separate regulation. And next slide. Thank you. And well, like Belgium and Austria, Germany is characterized by federalism, but reportedly with a quite a stronger degree. And even though Germany has not been evaluated very high in all the e-government rankings, it has been steadily increasing its positions in all of them. Recent reports suggest that there was a state minister for digitalization who was appointed to coordinate all the e-government initiatives, but to be honest, there was quite limited evidence on role of the state ministry in that area. There are plenty of other actors without direct hierarchy among each other. They would, for example, include the State Ministry of Internal Affairs, who are in charge of some e-government projects and cybersecurity, then do some policies on data. Then there is IT Council, which is sort of community of state secretaries who are responsible for digitalization in states. Then there is IT Planning Council, which is a collaboration of federal government and state government, which is later to be replaced by FEDKO. So it's quite complicated structure, and it is also complemented by the absence of a dedicated OOP regulation. There is an implicit notion of on OOP in one of the recently adopted regulations on online access in 2017, but again, there is no countrywide regulation on OOP. And from the technical perspective, there is also quite limited capacity of federal management of base registers. Most of the data is stored and managed locally. And for example, if you're moving from Hamburg to Berlin, the data will be transmitted directly between those states without involvement of federal government, and it will be proceeded only by request. And well, actually, the picture on the slide demonstrates one of the very few successful OP cases in Germany. It's the taxation system ELSTE, where data is processed at federal level. And next slide. And then coming to the last country, to France, it's also a centralized state, and it has been scoring literally average in all e-government rankings. But recently they started a very radical transformation several years ago by establishing several digitalization bodies and adopted dedicated legislation. The Secretary of State for Reform and Simplification, who are the major coordinating body of e-government initiatives, is now supported by 2 other ministries in 2017. And constituting the sort of managerial triangle, they are assessed by other ministers who are in charge of maintaining the accuracy of data. And in legal terms, France has been demonstrating also a very consequent approach toward policy making, passing several decrees on OOP with the one of the binding condition last year. And curiously, they were they implemented another legislation to attract citizens and to reduce their toward e-government initiatives. They introduced an error margin suggesting citizens can input erroneous data during their first use of the system. And from the technical perspective, the base registers are managed and stored centrally, with ministries being responsible to keep them up to date. Then there is a layer operated by API, which offers data catalogs aggregated by special domains, for example, fiscal information, addresses, etc., which are then connected with the websites of public services, which are actually providing public services to citizens and businesses. Next slide. And then during the analysis, I've been basically writing down all the OOP practices that were reported to be successful. And as a result, I got 15 characteristics, which I grouped into 6 categories. Starting with centralization, there are 2 found characteristics which are also correlating with the federal structure of the country. Austria and France, being highly centralized, have a central entity who carries out all the national digital agenda. Germany grants high level of authority to its states and struggles to create an overarching managing body. And Belgium, despite having certain federal initiatives, is still characterized by a certain freedom of its regions. Which brings me to the next point, in cooperation, where Belgian government tries to align the competing regional policies and initiatives, trying to integrate existing solutions. Further, Belgium, Austria, and France have created special entities to ensure participation of all the relevant stakeholders. And in Germany, this role should be later played by FEDKO. Then something common for all the countries is involvement into cross-border and pan-European projects. Then coming to legislation and policies, the needed dedicated OP legislation has been adopted by 3 out.
I think we lost Ekaterina again. Robert, maybe I can ask you something in between.
Sure.
We have such different systems in Europe, federalism like in Germany or in Austria. So what would be the essential next steps for the single digit gateway regulation? By end of this year, the information has to be available in 2 languages. In 2023, we have to have this data once only principle. So what really are the next step for the European countries in your perspective?
So basically, once we have had in the top project our first working prototype, so to speak, that we have several working prototypes, that we produced and used in the various pilots, we actually discussed together with the Connecting Europe facility on how could that be used for the single digital gateway. And so it was reviewed by the Connecting Europe facility, who developed a blueprint out of this, which is currently being discussed and agreed with the member states of the European Union. So there is currently an amendment process that allows us to actually ensure that all the member states are on board with this new technology. And once this alignment process has been finalized by the end, respectively, beginning of next year, this will be the basis for the implementing act, which has to be ready by mid next year, which kind of like then will provide all the member states with the input that they need to develop and implement the systems so that by the end of 2023, the single digital gateway can fully start with the data sharing cross-border.
The single digital gateway regulation dates back, I think, to 2018. But I have the personal feeling that a lot of, let's say, small municipalities even know or that didn't heard anything about this regulation has to be in place in the next couple of months.
So obviously, the important element here is that if a country has a data exchange layer in place, meaning that it already starts to integrate vertically and horizontally in the country, it is an easy time to connect it to Europe. Basically, you need one gateway, depending, of course, on the setup of the country. Ideally, you only need one gateway to connect it to the single digital gateway, and then you can go forward. So basically, the municipalities don't need to worry. If there is no data exchange layer, right, as Ekaterina has just before highlighted to us in some countries, then it gets, of course, a bit more difficult, right? So having in particular a federated setup of a country makes it a bit more challenging. We need to avoid to have kind of like a spaghetti connectivity idea and rather have a bit of a lasagna model so that we have a big pasta that we can connect easily rather than having singular solutions. So having national solutions that we can connect to Europe is an important key for ensuring the working and functioning single digital market.
And Roberto Viola is the Italian European cook behind.
Yes, I mean, we just need to make sure he provides us lasagna, not spaghetti.
Maybe Ekaterina is back again. How important is it for, let's say, this data once only principle to have a common e-government architecture for the whole country? Or, for example, like some countries have a register to have a big picture. How many registers do they have and who is responsible and which data are in these registers?
Well, from the countries that I analyzed, all of them have a centralized architecture and everything is done centrally and very well aligned with the already existing infrastructures and yet compatible with the European guidelines. Some pre-developed abilities offered by SEB, for example, and out of the 4 countries that I looked into, 3 of them demonstrate quite high level of alignment with all those principles, and they tend to have higher performance in OOP.
Robert, the technical interoperability behind the single digital gateway, I think it's an easy step against, let's say, legal or semantic interoperability. So what should we have? What would happen next if I'm coming from Austria with for example, electronic driving license to Germany, and a policeman stopped me and want to control my electronic driving license? I think there we have a lot to do in Europe.
So, I mean, you're right. The legal basis for checking the electronic driver licenses across border, we don't have fully yet, but that's certainly also something that is envisioned, including in the single digital gateway regulation on the longer run. So that's certainly something where we need to go to. That is also this cross-sectoral integration that we need. And I would say the vehicles domain, the driving domain is kind of the most integrated already. I mean, you already know yourself, if you take your Austrian car to Germany and you park it in the wrong place, they will give you a fine for more than 70 euros, and then you get that ticket back home. So there is already this data integration happening. And we need to use that on the one hand side to expand it to wider areas, and that's where also the single digit gateway will help us on the longer run. But yes, it is something that will be taken in steps. The single digit gateway only includes 21 services at this point, but I'm sure after the success and having such a flexible data exchange layer as it's currently envisaged for the SDGR, it will be soon expanded to more services than just the 21 at this point in time.
But this does also mean that, for example, if I have an electronically signed birth certification and I'm sending this to Estonia, for example, that the civil servants there can read this, can prove this electronic signature? Are civil servants ready for that?
I would say the key element is that such a European project as the single digit gateway regulation, it is something that actually will build trust through experience. Yeah? And when we actually have that experience, it will be possible that the civil servants in Estonia, in Germany, in Austria will learn to trust each other and the data that they are exchanging because they know it works. But to be honest, I also myself was lucky enough to become a three-time father now this year. And in the Estonian model, it was possible to register the name of my son online and then request or get automatically the birth certificate in an electronically signed format. Being an experienced European citizen, I still got a second copy on paper, just to be safe. You never know when you might need it.
Ekaterina, maybe we can come back to your presentations. Ekaterina, are you back? What will be
Yes.
the conclusion on your master thesis?
Well, basically, there was the 2 slides ago, there was the major slide with the most important outcomes of my thesis with a list of 15 practices that were split into 6 categories in centralization, involvement into international project legislation, society, and technical and semantical aspects. Well, I'm not going to go into all of them, but it was very interesting to see that 3 out of 4 countries, namely Belgium and France, are somewhat more active in adopting OP initiatives, while Germany hasn't been showing a lot of OP projects going on. And this is very curious because France, even if the country was scoring not the high in terms of once only principle, still started adopting all the OP initiatives that were already taken by Belgium and Austria. And even if it doesn't score right now very high, there is, well, in my opinion, if they keep on doing this work, they might catch up with the Austria and Belgium much sooner than Germany, for example.
Thank you very much. Is there a possibility for the online participants that they can read your master thesis?
Yes, I can share it with you.
Robert, we have the e-government action plan 2016 until 2020. In your opinion, what should happen next beyond 2020?
I mean, I think we already see, for example, through the OECD, the latest OECD benchmarking exercise, that proactivity is going to become one of the key issues for the future. And similarly, the readiness to adopt and to implement the new technologies such as artificial intelligence, which will help in particular to automate repetitive tasks in the government. And second, also, of course, to think about what possibilities does the distributed ledger technology provide us with, in particular in the area of self-sovereign identity and the possibilities to ensure the identity and record matching cross-border, which is a key problem that we still have today with the EIDAS regulation and the single digit gateway regulation. So something that hopefully will be addressed with the EID that Ursula von der Leyen is going to present very soon.
We have one question from the online audience for Robert. As first countries begin pilots or at least issue RFIs on decentralized identity structures, does the one's only principle cope with these systems? It seems like it is the opposite of the standard process of decentralized systems.
So, of course, the once only system that we have implemented for the European scale is something that is following the European model of cross-border e-government in the past years. So the one key problem that you have when you need to implement the European system is that basically you normally would not touch upon how does a member state implement its e-government services inside the country. However, Europe can define the interfaces for a member state to connect to Europe, and that's the only way how you can build such a European e-government system following a federated approach. Of course, it would be great if we all would use the same system across all 27 EU member states, but I would say in the political realities of today, that is just not feasible. So what we need to do is we need on the one hand side to have European coordination for making sure that we all use the same interfaces and we make something that we all trust to and trust with and we can work with. And through that, we are actually enabling the European data integration. And some compromises need to be taken, but I think in this way, we actually have a functioning system that will allow us all to have a better and more comfortable life as European citizens of the future.
Thanks very much, Robert. Thank you, Ekaterina. Thank you also for this out view, let's say, in beyond 2020, what will be next. And hopefully, we will share also the work of Robert and Ekaterina to our participants. Thank you very much. And we will be back in a few minutes and make a short break. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear online participants, welcome back to our afternoon session here in Lübeck. The next topic is very important for all of us. It's about the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are a collection of 17 interlinked goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve better and more sustainable future for all of us. It's like no poverty, quality education, climate action, sustainable cities and communities. The SDGs were already set in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly and are intended to be achieved by the year 2030. Now, Nora, the Executive Manager of the World Summits Award, will speak about the best applications and initiatives tackling the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Nora, please go ahead. So I guess we lost Nora. Let's wait a second. Yeah, that's in the online conference, so we have to wait, I guess, until
Really
Nora is
sorry.
connected back. Ah, there she is. So
Really
Nora,
sorry for that.
no problem. Now
you
you are
hear me
back.
now?
Now you can start with your presentation.
The beauty of technology.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I am currently in Luxembourg at the House of Startups and very excited to be there. I know that I'm probably a bit an alien to this conference, talking about something that is not so close to many of you, but is very dear to my heart. It's about how can startups and social businesses, young entrepreneurs can actually make a difference, contribute to the achievement of the UN SDGs, and with local content and local solutions, make a change in their respective countries and communities. As already said, I'm the executive manager of the World Summit Awards. World Summit Awards is a very strange title. Actually, it doesn't say anything, but that has to do with our history. WSA has been initiated back in 2003 in the framework of the United Nations World Summit on the Information Society. Very long title, so in short, WSA. And the WSA was the official contribution to this World Summit. And the idea was, from the beginning and is until now, that we use a global mechanism of an award, of a competition, to identify best practice solutions. Best practice solutions, how digital solutions in the local ecosystem can contribute to social change and to tackle local challenges. As we have been initiated around the United Nations, a lot of things are very close to us, which means multi-stakeholder processes, meaning global perspectives, meaning taking action on the UN SDGs, but also tackling the digital divide. How we do it is that we run a global contest in more than 180 countries worldwide, where we have a so-called local representative, a local expert, and they are reaching on our behalf out to their local ecosystems and nominating the best solutions. That way, each year we award 40 winners that are showing the diversity of local content and provide a kind of global knowledge platform and inspirational platform, what is already there. And ideally, it also avoids to reinvent the world in every country. Next slide, please. The digital divide. Oh, I see that my slides look horrible. Never mind, there should be digital divide. What is a digital divide? It basically means an uneven access to ICTs. And those digital divides that are relevant for WSA are different digital divides. There is the content divide. If the majority of content on the internet is English, if you are, usually you get, a lot of people say nowadays all the information is on the internet and basically everybody could probably Google themselves out of poverty. It's not. If you do not speak English, it's very hard to get relevant information. Another digital divide is the gender divide. More men than women still own a mobile phone or have access to the internet. And then there is the access divide. And I brought you a few numbers. And if you show the next slide, 87% of the population in developed countries, like in Europe, have access to the internet. But only 19% of the population in the least developed countries have access to the internet. That is also called the digital divide. On the next slide, 93% of the world population lives within the reach of a mobile broadband or internet connection, but only 53% of the world population are actually connected. And if you go to the next slide, which is also important to know, is that I made some research about a very basic internet subscription with your mobile phone, talking about 1 gigabyte. I guess all of you have much more. 1 gigabyte in the majority, most of the European countries, 1 gigabyte would cost less than $5. Whereas in the poorest countries in the world, a person for 1 gigabyte data subscription would pay $27. Meaning there is a huge digital divide that does not give everyone the same chances. And I want you to have those challenges in mind when we talk now about the SDGs and how the WSA projects contribute to their achievement. Next slide, please. The Sustainable Development Goals, and that has been already mentioned in the introduction, but here you see them, have been adopted back in 2015. They are really an urgent call to action. And they are recognizing that ending poverty has to go hand in hand with education, with climate action, with recognizing inequalities, and also spurring economic growth. Each UN member state has now a call or an agenda to act on, and in 2030, there will be a report. Each year, all the countries have to report back to the United Nations how much they have been achieved. As you see, all those issues have also a lot of subcategories, and actually each of us can refer to them. Most of them are probably more important to you, but if you think about climate action, quality education, sustainable cities, reducing inequalities, they are really close to all of us. So those things, the digital divide and the SDGs, I want you to have in mind when we talk about now the solutions of the WSA. I have been invited to, or have been asked to select a few of our winning projects that take action on the UN SDGs. And it was, I must say, it has been incredibly hard to choose. We have been awarded in the past years hundreds of fantastic projects, all of them inspirational, all of them doing great work, all of them having a real impact. But I tried to choose among them showing you the real diversity, but also talking about problems by offering their solutions. So we start with the first project, and if you have the next slide for me. 70% of our food is produced by smallholder farmers, but most of them have no access to information, live in extreme poverty, and suffer from climate change, from no rain or from storms, and it's very hard for them to sustain their local businesses. KUSA1 is in Kenya and India, and they provide an answer. They train so-called agripreneurs. So basically they create jobs, then they train those agripreneurs, and each of them gets a backpack. In this backpack, there is a device that has access to the internet and has access to a lot of content. And those agripreneurs then go out to local communities, to those smallholder farmers, and they train them. They train them about the right crops. They train them about how to compare prices on the market. They train them how to deal with the weather, and so on. So there are two ways. First, they're creating jobs, but also they're having an amazing impact on the farmers because they don't have to go to local markets or any other villages to really get this access to information. The next project, please. I think for all of us in Europe, it's the most normal thing to have an address. So if you invite friends, you would just send them the address or even a link on your Google, via Google or via WhatsApp. In a lot of developing countries, people do not have an address. So if they, for example, have to call the ambulance, they would say, you will see a tree that is shaped like an elephant, please turn right. And then you see another village and it's the third house on the left, which is not very efficient if it's about calling the ambulance or the police. Snoocode from Ghana provides a real solution for it. And they provide each person with one time you need to have a phone with a GPS signal, and then you have a 6-digit code that you can, I don't know, write on a post-it, put it on your fridge, and whenever you need it or call the emergency services, you just have to mention those 6 digits code and you have a very accurate and clear address. So is this pure technical innovation? Probably not. Does it have an impact and contribute to the achievements of the SDGs? Yes. Next project, please. So now we are a bit more into high tech and going into health tech. This solution has been also relevant during COVID. It's Proximi. They're from Lebanon, but they're also running in the UK and the US. And it's a virtual AR solution and software that doctors can use. So it's used during surgeries, before, during, and after surgeries. Surgeons are connected, and for example, surgeon living in the US could work together with a surgeon in, let's say, Nigeria, but this software really allows them to collaborate like they're in the same room. So you share knowledge, you share insights without having doctors really flying all over the world. Next slide, please. Cancer, a topic and a disease that is usually really creating fear and anxiety, especially for children. Imagine that a child gets the diagnosis cancer, or that someone in the family gets the diagnosis cancer. BEYER from Brazil found a fantastic, or developed a really nice solution for that. First, they had started with just a booklet, but then they made it to an interactive game and app. And this app guides children after the diagnosis of cancer through the process. So why does mommy lose her hair? What happens if I have to go to the hospital? Why they are taking my blood? All of that is nicely done and for the children, and reduces the fear and explains it with high quality content. Next slide, please. I didn't believe it when I heard it for the first time that in some developing countries, people still die only because they do not know their blood type. The simplest medical information is usually not available for people in a lot of developing countries. Kia Medical from Benin found a fantastic solution for that. It's not super innovative, and for most European countries, probably the real standard. But what they provide is that each patient gets their medical information with them by either you have a phone and have all of that there, but even if you do not have a phone, you get a QR code and can, for every doctor where you go to, they have all your medical information. It makes the work for the doctors much more efficient, but it also saves a lot of money for the patients, because usually they would not go to many of those medical checks, getting only the same examples again and again. A lot of people cannot read and write, and if then the doctor says, but you already had a test for whatever it is, they could probably not report it back from the results they got back then. So Kia Medical really offers a fantastic solutions for that. Probably after we had Kia presented at our last jury meeting, right afterwards, 3 ministers of health from other African countries approached us and asked us to get us in touch with Kia Medical, because they wanted it for the same country. And that's what I meant before. A platform like WSA could avoid to reinvent the wheel in every country, but that we can learn from each other. Next slide, please. Online learning. I think all of our kids, all of the kids have online learning during COVID. It was really a reality. Lots of team calls, lots of frustration, and a lot of boring stuff. Lifter from Finland really provides the kids the opportunity to travel to other cultures, experience other habits, meet other people. They create in 360-degree short documentaries, interactive story for the kids. So this is could be done at home, but usually it's used by teachers. In this screenshot that I shared here, kids could, for example, during the lunch break, travel in this interactive story to Habiba's home. It's a mother in Syria, and the children can then have lunch with the Syrian family, learning about the traditions, learning about how many brothers and sisters the kids have, but also learning how to make couscous. But there are many other storybooks that really make learn those children to become global citizens, learn about empathy, learning about other cultures, and so on. Next slide, please. I hope you don't have already an information overload. I know it's a lot. Badi and Birdie is tackling about the usual boredom of kids when parents suggest to go to the museum on the weekend. A lot of kids would prefer to play soccer or probably sit in front of the PlayStation. But with Badi and Birdie, the visit to the museum gets actually really fun. Badi and Birdie are 2 characters, and they already get the kids excited at home about what they will experience a bit later in the museum. I know it sounds a bit like, again, the kids glued to the screen, but there are actually only a few artworks where the kids during the museum will really look at Badi and Birdie. The rest is really about the artworks, is quality content, and is highly interactive. Next slide, please. Completely the other topic and extremely relevant is human trafficking. Millions of people are victims of human trafficking each year. This project comes from India and is about this solution. It is about this problem. Most of the victims of human trafficking are women, and many of them quite young girls, and end up in prostitution. Missing is actually an art piece. It's a cultural project and has one level. It's an interactive game. It's a role play where the player is in the role of the victim and experiences all the horrible stories. It's not about shocking people. It's really about creating awareness for something that is in many countries still a taboo topic. Next slide, please. Also about women empowerment. Reproductive health, having the menstruation is still in countries like Pakistan a big taboo. Even mothers would not talk to their daughters about it. But Raji is a chatbot that is anonymous and where girls can ask questions about reproductive health and they would get honest, clear and high quality answers from the chatbot in all the local languages. Again, is this technical innovation? Probably not. Is the impact rate? Yes, definitely. Next slide, please. Coming back to Europe, but another problem. I often wondered when I'm seeing blind people on the street, how are they actually dealing with their daily challenges? Most of them are doing pretty well, but some of the super small and probably small issues can be a challenge. Like, did I actually turn the light off? Does this, I'm going on a date, is my trousers fitting my blouse? Are the colors matching? Things like that. And for those small things, Be My Eyes is a fantastic solution. It's a free app from Denmark that already has thousands and thousands of users all over the world, and where you as a volunteer can lend your eyes to a blind person. So if you're a volunteer, you might get a call. It's free. It's a free video call through the app where a blind person that speaks the same language as you and is in the same time zone would call you and probably asking you through the video call, I'm sorry, this is my milk package. Is the what about the expiry date? For that, you can easily help, but it also makes it bridges kind of the blind and the people that can see. Next slide, and it's already the last project that I wanted to talk to you. Probably some of you based in Germany already know it. It's Ecosia, and it's the search engine that actually plants trees. Sounds simple, but it's actually pretty innovative. Just by searching something in the internet with their search engine, you can plant trees. Their whole profit is spent on planting trees. They spent millions of them already all over the world. And it's not just planting any trees. They really collaborate with NGOs in the local countries where they're planting the trees, making sure that they work with the local communities and that they plant the trees that are actually relevant for them. Ecosia itself is also running CO2 neutral by having all the buildings and their servers run by solar energy. That was the last project. I know it has been a lot. I hope that you got a bit inspired. If you want to see more of them and actually meet not only me talking about these projects, but having the fantastic founders behind them, you should probably come to one of our next events. And if you show the next slide, there's a chance coming up pretty soon. It's our online conference. It's the European Young Innovators Festival, where the best European founders, 16 of them, will pitch their solutions in front of an international jury. And it would be wonderful to welcoming some of you there. And you will see that it's much more inspiring listening to the founders than only to me. So it would be wonderful if you are interested in the World Summit Awards. It's a global community, it's a global platform, and I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nora. This was a very impressive presentation, impressive applications, impressive initiatives. I saw it the first time now, and it's I have definitely some ideas how we can interact together, and I will definitely look at the WSA platform. So what I learned is that if we implement new applications, we have to look and should look also to the sustainable development goals. I guess we can reach some of them more easy than the other ones, but it's very great that you give us the impressions. Do you have any experience, especially in Europe, how the startups interwork with the public administration and how both are benefit from each other?
Yeah, so one thing is that I must say it's not easy. Startups work completely different, especially in terms of, I would say, speed, time-wise, than public administration. Public administration have to run through all the processes and making sure that they fit regulations and so on, and a startup usually wants to act very fast. And therefore, there's a lot of room for frustration, I must say. But if it's working, it's very beneficial for both sides. For governments, that they're getting the fresh ideas, inputs, and innovative ideas from the startups, but also for the startups, if they're talking about impact and if they are thinking, if they have an honest goal to achieve the best impact, they need public administration to really grow and to really distribute the services to many to many people. So I think a few examples are, if you look, for example, to like say urbanization or transportation solutions, a lot of the problems come from the public administration, where they see the need to interact with citizens, to have new solutions, and then they have to collaborate with a startup to come up really with the solutions. But it has to have a lot of communication in order to understand each other's world. I hope that a bit answered.
Yeah,
so
of
it's,
course.
Yeah, there lies a lot of potential, but it's we also should not be naive about it's not always easy.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you very much, Nora. And I will definitely try the Ecosia search platform, search engine. Next in a few minutes, we will talk about the digital transformation team at 5 minutes past 5, I guess. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear online participants, welcome back to the conference. Next, we have the Think and Do tank of the Federal Administration, the Digital Innovation Team. Since April 2019, the Digital Innovation Team has been testing, approaching, or adapting and teaching a wide range of approaches that promote change in the way public administration works. They have learned where the needs for sustainable digital transformation are, not only on the technological level, also on the cultural level. They have established a network of innovation drivers inside and also outside of the administration. How they did it and which role a pink alpaca has to do with it will now be explained by Jan-Ole BEYER, the head of the Digital Innovation Team. Jan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Super happy to be here and especially happy to see my hometown again. It's sad actually that I can't be there in person and only be virtual, but I'm feeling all the marzipan and all the other things I love there. Yeah, digital transformation, innovation, and Pinkelpackers. What is DIT.bund in Germany? Could we get to the next slide? So let's start with the easiest thing. What is at least what was our mission in April 2019 when we were founded by State Secretary Fitt, the former CIO of the federal government. In the coalition agreement, the parties agreed to build an e-government agency, which should work a bit as a digital innovation team, as a team which makes it faster to build IT solutions, which makes it easier to build innovative IT solutions, things like that, long before we discussed Online Access Act and things like that. And we thought about how we could fulfill this thing, how we could build this agency. And the first idea, State Secretary Fitt, was, well, if we want to build a unit, kind of institution which should show how agile working and innovative working could do good for the government, we could do it in the, let's say, conservative or classical way. So we must work in this project in an agile way itself. So we started as a project group, 5 people in April 2019. And it took like about 3 months for a short phase of designing and thinking about what could be the tasks of this agency, how could they work, how could an innovation management process look like, with which we could help the other agencies of the federal level. But that's only one part, because we see it here in the slide. We think that, of course, one of the most important parts, beside technological things and technological projects, and we heard a lot about that in the earlier keynote of my colleague Ernst Berger. Besides that, it's enormously important to focus on the organizational change. It's not only about technology, it's more and more, and we heard it in other sessions before, it's more and more about organization. It's about mindset. Digital transformation is not really, especially in public administration, not really an organization and technology subject. So first step is to work together with our colleagues in the administration, change their mindset, change their organization, show that working can be done in another way. And that's why this small cute alpaca is there, to show that even administration can be a bit different and work a bit different and look a bit different, of course, too. So, but that shouldn't be enough. That wouldn't be enough. We have 2 other focuses in the beginning. First thing, industry. I think it's maybe not the same thing in France, and it's definitely not in the country Israel, but we see in Germany that we have no really connections, and we heard it in the session before. Jan asked Nora in the late part if there are any examples how GovTech startups work together with government, and how we can facilitate these innovative solutions for government. And I think, I think it's really hard to find good examples for that. So what's really important is to find these connects between these organizations, between the startup mindset on the one hand and the organization of the public administration on the other hand, to connect these mindset, to connect people. And same thing is for civil society. There are huge great civic tech projects, initiatives. My colleague Cordula Kiesling told you about the WER versus virus hackathon some months ago. 28,000 people working together on IT, mostly IT solutions regarding COVID-19. There are so much things we could use and use better and foster, and even learn on the other hand too. Next slide, please. So what we do, or what we at least try to do, is to create the space to shape innovative solutions for the state. So we are not the team which really builds these solutions. we are not the implementers. We are not focused on technology. We are not software developers and things like that. But we want to train our colleagues, and we want to show them how we can work in another way, and which are the approaches, which are the working methods to do that. Next slide, please. So what we did in the beginning is to focus. We were, as I said, 5 people, and 5 people can do all these things I mentioned before. So we focused on the public content administration because it's the base. Yeah? If administration itself doesn't really have a feeling or feels the need in a way to use other agile ways, is used really to use these methods. I think it will be difficult to work better together with startups and civil society. So we need a kind of base to make it possible to communicate together. So what we did, we started to focus on our dear colleagues in the federal government. Next slide, please. And what we did was a lot of operative, practical stuff. We did a lot of project coaching. We showed and took them on our hands, the colleagues, and showed them how agile project management works. We built with them together design thinking workshops to find solutions. We showed them why it is important to understand a problem before we design a solution, because I think it's not only here in Germany the case that we often think we already know the solutions, but we have to. It would be a much better idea. That's better said. It would be a much better idea to step some steps back and look at the problem, do some user research, discuss if the problem is really the problem, or if there are other problems which need other solutions and things like that. So all this, what we mean when we talk about structured innovation. And of course, networking, connecting people together is always an important thing, because we learned in the last 19 months or 16, I don't really, around about 1.5 years, we learned in this time that in nearly most agencies, there are some small islands of innovators, of people who started to think that they can work in a different way, who started to learn about methods like liberating structures or agile project management, Scrum, and things like that. But they don't know that there are other people in other agencies as well. So they are just doing their thing and struggling in their, let's say, more conservative organization, and didn't find people to connect. So that's an important part too. Next slide, please. So some numbers, just in case you're a number nerd, we had around about, I think it's more than 250 people we could train in the last 1.5 year in agile methods. We have lots and lots of keynote speeches, conferences, workshops which we designed on design thinking inspired methods to help our colleagues to deal with these things. And next slide, please. I think especially after we got our new, not so new anymore, State Secretary Rikke with its agenda, I think we are now ready to ignite stage 2, because next slide, please. We focused the last, next slide. There it is. We focused in the last 1.5 year on the public administration itself and connecting our colleagues. As I said in the beginning, that's not enough. We have to work more with startups. We have to work more with civil society. We have to connect them. We have to find ways how we can work better together and find faster and more innovative solutions on the problems we have to deal with in the public administration. Next slide, please. So, of course, we will not stop the things we did in the last month. We won't do all of this alone. We're just started to hand over this more really operative tasks like project coaching, project mentoring, even skilling and things like that to other agencies of the federal ministry. But next slide, please. We will focus on a bit more, let's say, strategical and more ministerial parts to work better together with startups and civic tech scene. The downside, down you see the first step, what we learned in the last months, it's especially important, and we saw it, I think every one of us saw it in the last month with COVID-19. Even if virtual conferences, virtual meetups and things like that were good in the year 2020, it's not the same as we could sit together and discuss in the same room, and we see it in this conference as well. It would of course be nicer if I would sit on the stage and we could connect, we could afterwards discuss and things like that. So to deal with that, we started to design, to build in an experimental way GovTech and innovation hubs. We have some of these kind of hubs, I think, in other countries in Europe as well. But I think what's special in Germany is that we are not only that we are not a really centrally organized state, but that we have very important lender, the federal states, and we have to work together with them. So we're trying to build these hubs where startups, where civic tech initiatives, where public administration can come together, discuss, learn, network, start to do projects together. We don't want to build these not only in Berlin, but on the long term or the middle term in the regional levels too. Besides that, funding is always subject. I think there are huge possibilities in Germany, in other countries as well, to support small government technology startups, to support all these wonderful civic tech initiatives with money and with other possibilities to work together. So that's what we are currently discussing too, building a kind of promotional fund together with some innovation challenges to foster this change and to foster this connection between startup scene, civic tech initiatives, and public administration. And next slide, please. Last but not least, of course, we can't do all of this alone, obviously. Yeah, we need partners for that. We are still a small team with now 10 people. So we are currently discussing with a lot of potential partners from industry, from civil society. What did they learn in the last years in these topics? What did they already do? And where can we come together, work together, and find things we can foster this change? Next slide, please. So what's left to say to all of us here, let's make agile work and innovation mindsets and government the new normal, and not only here in Germany, but everywhere in Europe, and make cute pink alpacas too a bit of the new normal. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jan-Ole. We directly have two questions from the chat, so let's start with them. Do you think a similar initiative as EU level supporting cross-border project would have a value?
Well, it's hard to say, actually. Normally, I would say yes, because for me in person, of course, it's important to work better together, to learn from other initiatives in Europe. But I see in the last month that it's hard enough to do these kind of things in its own country with its own rules and its own organizational culture. So yes, I would definitely be happy to have this, but I'm not really convinced that we are there yet to make the best out of it.
Yeah, that might be the case, yes. The second question is, how do you overcome procurement difficulties for startups? Not only for startups, I guess.
Well,
also for
that's a really tough question. And actually, the answer is short, we didn't. Unfortunately, we didn't. Of course, there are new methods like innovation partnerships, I think it's the right name in English, which are not very, well, not many projects really use these things. But no, actually, I don't have a really good answer for this, but I hope we will find it in the next month and in the next year.
Yeah,
I know a lot of people already tried and didn't, but I'm still optimistic.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, there's a lot of things about the startups, to interwork with you together, to get also the civil society into projects. Without this solved, I guess it will be tough for all of us. You meant at the beginning the organizational change, the cultural change. How COVID-19 has changed your work? On the one hand, of course, you meant already the online conferences, but you had meetings with them together. How are you doing it now? And do you think that it has the same quality, or does it take more time to take the people with you?
It changed our work drastically. I have to admit. We had some planned workshops in like March and April. We could still do this. Of course, we didn't have platforms, tools. We were not used to tools existed. In many cases, we were not able to use these tools because of data protection things, because of IT security things. So it needed some time to get a bit adopted, and we have the benefit as an innovation team that we are able to make many experiments and try out platforms which are not the normal thing which to be used in the federal government, just to try them out. So it was a bit easier for us than for others, but I definitely think virtual conferences, virtual meetings, virtual workshops are totally different from other real life workshops, and there are formats which do work good. There are formats which work nearly good as in-person workshops, but I'm still a fan of see people in person, and I hope the time will come back to see you, all of you, not only on my computer screen.
Yeah, it would be good to have you next time in Lübeck directly in person. Do you have a platform where you share the projects already? So where you would like to work with startups together or with civil society?
No, most of the things I told you about what's coming up next is still in an early stage of thinking about it in conception. So we don't have it on a website. We do have a website, but it's much too old and not telling really about our current situation. So you might ask us still, write an email.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ole.
Thank you.
See you then tomorrow in the panel discussion again.
Yeah.
In the evening session, which starts at 6:30, we will have the speeches then from Daniel Günther, the Minister President, State Government of Schleswig-Holstein, and Dieter Michael Grohmann, the Hollywood awarded filmmaker.